Whenever I talk to kids, I'm like, have you done visualization? They're like, yeah, my coach tells me to visualize my routine. Oh, okay, well, how does it go? And they're like, well,
I
what do
fall
you
all the
mean?
time.
Yeah. And I was like, well, do you fall in it? Do you make mistakes? And they're like, yeah, all the time. I was like, so do you think those are good visualizations to have? They're like, no. They replay those mistakes. They picture themselves falling. And instead of building the confidence that we want them to have, they're increasing their anxiety and fear when they're getting to those events and doing those skills. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the NGA podcast where we talk all things gymnastics. I am your host, Rebecca Grady, and I'm here with my incredible co-host,
Mike
Dr. Ian
Nador.
Kreider.
Try that again. Back up.
Dr. Ian Kreider.
Mike Nador.
All right. So today we're talking about two, I think, of the most commonly recommended mental skills in sports, and that's deep breathing and visualization. And most athletes, coaches, parents already know how important these are. I just feel like we hear take a deep breath or visualize your routine all the time, but I don't think that we go to the extent of explaining it. I feel like they're often misunderstood because it's not just about breathing, it's about how you breathe. And it's not just about picturing something, it's about how your brain learns to visualize safely and effectively. And another big piece is that these aren't skills you just call up when you're nervous or anxious. If you haven't practiced them regularly when you're calm, it's not going to work. So today, let's talk about why visualization and deep breathing needs to be done a certain way, the importance of practice, and why simply telling a gymnast to visualize without teaching them how can actually increase anxiety instead of helping their performance. So I'm thinking let's start with just deep breathing because it's probably one of the fastest ways we can directly influence the nervous system. I think one of the biggest misunderstandings about deep breathing is that people think it just means taking bigger breaths. But what really matters is breathing from the belly and not the chest. Chest breathing keeps the body in stress mode. So that's that fight or flight response that you hear everybody talking about. And then belly breathing is actually activating the calming part of your nervous system, which helps the brain shift back into performance mode. So in your gyms, I know that I talk to a lot of gyms about this, but is this something that you guys practice as a team, encourage your athletes to do alone? Do you teach how to do it in your gyms?
Yeah, so we do a deep breathing because not only is it great for learning how to calm the nervous system down things, but it's also good for recovery too. So up to 10 minutes of deep breathing has been shown to decrease soreness the next day. I like deep breathing for multiple reasons, both of those being one. So we do that. Last night we did 10 minutes of deep breathing after the team was done. So we have worked our way up there. The first time we ever did it, we did it for 3 minutes. And the girls opened their eyes and it was like they're on another planet. They didn't know where they were anymore. And they're like, that was only 3 minutes. And,
Yep.
and it seemed like it took forever, right? So, but we've worked our way up to 10 minutes now. And it's not too big of a deal. The middle schoolers tend to get a little giggly about halfway through and I have to separate them. But other than that, they do pretty good with it.
I love that you said that you build up to it because please, anyone listening, do not start out with 5 or 10 minutes. That will just destroy your athletes.
It just, yeah, it's a long time.
It really
It's even a
is.
long time when you're sitting there. And I always wonder, what do the rec parents or preschool parents think? Because I've just got a team of 15 to 20 girls just all laid out on the floor with their eyes closed, breathing. I'm like, I wonder if anybody ever asks what they're like, goes into the office and be like, what are they doing out there? And
Is
the
everyone
office would just
okay?
have to be like, I have no idea.
That's funny. What about you, Mike? Do you guys do anything like that in your gym?
A little bit, not too much. We wrap it with visualization a little bit. We mainly use it on short term. There's if there's a fall in the routine, if we're doing routines and there's a fall in the routine, and we pull them aside. We only have 30 seconds, but we say, let's take a few deep breaths. Let's refocus. And when you start again, this is what you need to start with, this skill in your routine. And so we use that to kind of get them grounded again or get them back so they're not, upset about the fall. It just kind of calms them so they can get back up and do the routine. And so we use it for that, but we're not using it a lot like on a daily basis. A lot of the younger athletes, especially the boys, they have such a short attention span. I have during the deep breathing, I don't really know what's going on in their minds, if it's being helpful or if it's not being helpful. So maybe need a little guidance there with them on how to do that. But yeah, we mainly use it if they're having, if they're just having an off day, if they're struggling in workouts, things like that, we'll tell them to take a break, take some breaths. Let's try to, get our composure back. Let's try to relax and then get up and try it again. We use it for that a lot.
Yeah, I am really big on encouraging doing deep breaths before you do skills, having it become a rhythm with your routine, whether it's deep breaths and then doing your keywords and then your skill, like having a rhythm about how they think about performing their skills. I think sometimes, so whenever I work with gymnasts and I ask them what deep breathing is, they actually really don't know. So they're always just like, I just take a deep breath and I feel better. And I was like, well, it's a little bit different
Do
than
that.
that. So I was thinking that we could maybe go through just a very basic on what it is. So that coaches, parents, athletes, if you're wanting to start trying this at home, that you can do it to make sure that we're actually tapping into the right part of your nervous system to help decrease anxiety and nervousness instead of increasing it. When we teach it, we want athletes to focus on breathing into their belly. So when they inhale, their belly should expand outward like a balloon and their shoulders should stay relatively still. Like your chest
Mhm.
shouldn't be moving that much. And we want a very slow and controlled exhale. That is probably the most important part of it because the slow exhale is actually what sends one of the strongest signals to your nervous system to calm you down. It tells the brain that your body is safe and it helps the athlete move from that stress mode to back to the performance mode and actually taps into that part of their brain where they can think more. So it's calming them down in that sense. But this is something that takes practice because it's really awkward. I always feel like it's so much easier to start doing it when you're laying down. We want it to become a natural part of breathing for them. And without practice, it just doesn't work. And it's very difficult to, when you are stressed, scared, or not, just to tap into it, be like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to deep breathe. Because for one, it's really hard to remember about skills that you don't practice when you're calm. So that's a big part of it. And it's something that actually needs to be programmed. And the reason why I say this is because we program our deloading week, like we just talked about that with the mid-season slump last week when we were having our discussion. I think deep breathing and visualization needs to be programmed into your planning. And it doesn't have to be after or before every practice. But if you can practice as a group, it normalizes it instead of us just bringing it up when something's going wrong with an athlete. So it's like when that happens, we're shining more of a spotlight on them. And then they feel like something's wrong with them versus this is just a normal part of our sport. And that mental training should just be a normal part of our performance and our training, like everything else, conditioning and stretching. And getting the kids to do it as a team, huge because they love doing things as groups. Yes, they can be very silly, but starting off short, especially with
Mhm.
boys, Mike, I always have my boys start out with about a minute when I'm working with them. It's like, we're going to do a minute together and your mind's going to get distracted. That's okay. Just bring it right back. And we're just trying to focus on the air going in and out. It's going to seem silly, but just try to commit with me. Why do you think it's really difficult for coaches to program mental skills in to their training?
Yeah, it's just another time thing, right? So,
Yeah.
everyone kind of goes, oh man, we've only got 4 hours of practice today. How on earth could we fit in another
Right.
thing, right? I think it's just about prioritizing it and realizing with mental training, I found that it doesn't take a ton of time. It just takes some consistency.
Yeah.
And then once you get it, you can kind of coast a little. Like once they figure out how to do deep breathing, well, then you can just kind of coast through for a little bit and go, all right, now that we've mastered this, now we can move on to our next mental training thing. It doesn't always have to be like our skill work where it's like, all right, good, you got it on the low bar, now get on the high bar, or you got it with a mat, all right, now no mat, or you got it right, and it's always like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? I think with mental training, it's okay to take it a little bit slow and
Yeah.
it's okay to go, all right, yeah, we got this down pat. Let's just use this skill now for a little while until we've got time to work on some more things.
Yeah, there's within the gym, even if you can find some time to work on it, there's so many distractions in the gym.
Hmm.
There's so much noise. There's so much going on. It's really hard for them to focus in on that and really get into that rhythm, if you will, of deep breathing and relaxing because there are so many other distractions. So if you happen to have maybe a dance room or multi-purpose room or something in your gym you can take them to so they can really do it properly. I think that's beneficial, but it's also good to, I guess, to practice with the commotion and the noise, especially if they're in a competition setting. There's all types of noise and distractions and things. So I think they need to learn how to get into that rhythm or get into that relaxing breathing mode and kind of refocus mode. Even with all the distractions, even though it may be hard to do with everything going on in the gym, I think what you said, Rebecca, is just a minute. Just take a minute and get it started.
Hmm.
Some of the kids they'll understand it and they'll get it. Some won't, but just to like everything else, stay consistent with it. I think is what's important. Like visualization, it's a learned technique, and you're not going to learn it. You're not going to learn a language if you don't practice it often enough. So you have
Yes.
to spend that, even if it's just a minute during workout, and practice it, and kind of go through it with them, and remind them what it's for, so that they find some purpose in that minute. Rather than closing their eyes and thinking about video games or something, they can really get into it and understand why they're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why my Duolingo app keeps yelling at me because I'm not spending enough time doing it consistently.
You're never going to learn Spanish, Ian.
Never,
Well, we don't
never.
we don't want Rebecca yelling at us because we're not doing it,
That's
doing
right.
it, her breathing every day. So
Hey, I didn't say you had to do it every day.
That's
yeah,
right.
Like
Yeah, and I
2 or
don't
3.
I happen to have done it last night, but we don't do it every day. We try and do it every day of our light weeks because we have a little bit more time because conditioning doesn't take as long. But on our normal weeks, sometimes we can do it once a week. Sometimes we can do it twice a week. Sometimes we can't do it at all. But at least they're getting some practice in over the course of a month. We probably hit it 4 or 5 times.
And one thing I think about mental training skills or specifically deep breathing and visualization that can become a challenge is that you don't see immediate results with these things. And I
Hmm.
think that can be very difficult for coaches because we're shifting from this short term how we used to get results with kids. We're changing how we're coaching them. And then now we're shifting to all of this positive coaching and then adding deep breathing and visualization. It's very difficult to have patience to see those things because sometimes you may not even really see the results of deep breathing. It's not going to be anything that's really tangible, right?
Yep,
Is that the right word?
that's
Tangible?
right.
Okay. So I don't know how you guys think about that when it comes to incorporating some of these skills that maybe sometimes coaches are a little leery on incorporating them just because of the time commitment and, not actually seeing the results.
Yeah, and maybe, coaches need to know what the results should look like too.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times they know the skill, but they don't necessarily know what the end result should be or what the process is leading up to that, right? It's like seeing Simone Biles do a triple double on floor. You're like, oh, that's cool. How on earth would you teach that? Right.
Right.
For a coach that just sees the skill and goes, well, I don't even know how I would begin to teach that. I've taught up to a back layout or something. How on earth would I teach a triple double? They don't know what the process looks like. And then they don't know what the milestones would look like along the way. They don't know what outcomes should happen
Mhm.
along the way if they don't know enough about it. So they go, all right, deep breathing is cool, but what are we aiming for here? What's the process look like? And if you don't know, like my girls, they lay on their back when they do it. And so I can see if their stomach or if their chest is rising because they
Yep.
usually put one hand on each.
Yep.
So that way they can see it. And then I can sit there and count as well as they're breathing, right? Because I can see it moving. I can count, go, hey, no, you need to exhale a little bit longer, or all right, no, you're inhaling for 8 and you're exhaling for 4. That's the opposite. Switch that, please. And so there's ways to do it, but you have to know what the process is.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I'm glad that you brought that up too, because I think coaches sometimes are like, "Why is there just one more thing for me to learn?" Because you guys already have to know a ton of stuff anyway, so it can be frustrating to be like, "Oh, so now I have to add this to my programming," versus I was just coaching gymnastics.
Yeah. So,
And I
Rebecca,
yeah.
if you're a beginner coach just starting off and you want to start a process like this, what would be your recommendation on how to go about it?
Yeah, I think that doing it as a team, I usually say at the end of practice because that's, when you're cooling down. And I would have everybody lay out together, like Ian said, on the floor if you can, or find some area to do it, and just teach them the basics of it and just a minute. It doesn't even have to be long. They can stretch, lay down, one hand on their chest, one hand on their stomach. First talk about the whole we're going to breathe in through our nose, we're going to exhale through our mouth. And that's is actually very important because the exhaling through your mouth allows you to have that slower exhale, which uh, you know, comes into contact with that calming part of your nervous system. So that's really important. And then they can feel it, like he said, like you can feel if your chest is moving up and down, or you can feel if your tummy's moving up and down. So that it's just like the basics. And they're probably not going to be able to do it right for a while. You'll watch some of them and they'll be like doing these kind of body waves because they're like, this is so weird. But that's how I would start it. I would start out a minute and then I would do at the end of 2 practices a week if you can. And then after you feel like they look like they're consistently getting it, you can bump it up. And I usually bump it up a minute at a time. And I also usually change on how I inhale and exhale when I'm working with kids individually. But, starting off with that 4 inhale, 4 hold, exhale 6. So, like,
Triangular breathing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a good way to start. And then you can up it as they go on. And, you can reach out and we can talk about those things. But that's a great way to start for
Yeah,
new coaches or gyms.
yeah, I think once they like their thought process, like what's going through their head, they're concentrating on whether it be, how many seconds they've inhaled, how many seconds they've exhaled. They're thinking about that. But then after they get to a point where they don't have to think about that, where would you suggest their mind go or to kind of um, help with that whole process of relaxing?
Yeah. So I pay attention to the numbers, the counting. I tell them to always initially think about the air going in their body and feeling what it's doing to you physically so you can kind of feel it. And then I always start with just imagery, like creating like happy places first. Because for us to have good visualization, which we'll transition into, is that you have to be able to visualize something. And it's always nice to do someplace that you feel safe, calm, and happy. And a lot of kids like to do beaches. They visualize their home, a cool vacation. And the big thing is getting the detail. So I have them figure out what they can see, what they can hear, what they can smell, touch, all of those senses, because that's important. And then we can transition into actual visualization with it. So after your kids have gotten used to doing deep breathing, a great way to do visualization is in a calm state. That actually makes a big difference in whether the visualization is successful versus something that's riddled with mistakes, them getting hurt. Because if you talk to kids, whenever I talk to kids, and I'm like, have you done visualization? They're like, yeah, my coach tells me to visualize my routine. I'm like, oh, okay, well, how does it go? And they're like, well,
I
what
fall
do you
all the
mean?
time.
Yeah, and I was like, "Well, do you fall in it? Do you make mistakes?" And they're like, "Yeah, all the time." I was like, "So do you think those are good visualizations to have?" They're like, "No." So they replay those mistakes. They picture themselves falling. And so instead of building the confidence that we want them to have, they're increasing their anxiety and fear when they're getting to those events and doing those skills.
So with visualization, for like to add on to what you were saying.
Right.
So I was talking to one of my athletes last night because we try and do a little bit of visualization with deep breathing if they can. If not, then they split it up and they do deep breathing and then visualization.
Yeah.
And so with the visualization, said, hey, it would be great if you're at the point where you can do routines in your head while we do this. If you're not at that point where you can do correct routines without falling, without big mess ups, without all that dramatic imagination stuff that you're adding in. Uh, if you can't do that though, then let's just go to a happy place. Let's go to your calming place, whether that's a beach or a sunset or whatever, right? And then first, kind of how I introduce it to them is I say first, just give it a still picture. So, can you visualize just a still picture of the place that you want to be? Okay. And then, if you can do that, then have it come to life and have things, start moving. Have it actually, if you're sitting on the beach, have the waves start to crash and roll in, right? And then once that happens, then all right, now can you have a breeze blowing and you can see trees moving? And then from there, then can you imagine someone walking past you? Or then can you get up and go walk out into the water? Or right. And so we're just kind of step by step working through that visualization, trying to add a little bit of detail at a time, and seeing if they can start in a non-stressful environment and successfully visualize, and then go into a stressful environment and still visualize correctly.
Exactly. Yes. I love that. That's a really good build up because there's a lot of different ways that you can visualize. So like extreme basic is when I'll have them break down a skill, like a
Hmm.
backhand spring round beam, and I tell them to tell me what's something in the what's something important at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the skill.
Hmm.
That like if you were teaching me how to do it, what would you tell me to remember? And they're like, oh, having a good like jump back. Like you want to make sure you have that sit that goes back. And then they're like, and then seeing your hands and then watching your second foot come down. So then I'll be like, okay, great, write those down. And then I'll have them read it out loud to me. And I'm like, do you kind of see this happening? And they're like, yes. And I was like, okay, that's what we want, just a basic scene. And then after they do visualization, then it's easier to transition from breaking these sort of keywords, not the exact keywords that we'll use when we're training, but then they can transfer it to visualization. So I always start with skills. Um, one skill, usually an easy skill, maybe one that they have really well first after they do deep breathing as a group. And that's something you can ask them to do. And then they can pick a harder skill. And when, like you said, when they are successful with that, then we can transition to routines. And the reason why is like I always explain to them because they're like, is visualization really helpful? Like this seems like a lot of, and it kind of is. But I always tell them that your brain uses similar neural pathways when you visualize things as when you're actually performing the skills. So even though you're not physically moving, you're still practicing, and that's important. And so when we do it with intention, that helps us build confidence and familiarity. Wow, Becca.
Ooh,
Whoa, that was
nice.
painful. How, wait, someone say that word for me. Oh
I don't know if I can now. I'm scared to.
my
You.
God.
Nope.
Parity.
Familiarity.
Familiarity.
I
Oh
think
my
it's a
gosh.
larity. I think it's an L in there. Familiarity.
Familial.
Maybe.
Oh my gosh, I can't say the word. All right. So, anyways, it helps you build confidence and it makes you feel familiar with those skills.
There you
It was a
go.
little bit better.
English
But,
is wonderful.
dude, English is hard. And so, anyways, it helps you feel more confident when you go and actually train those skills. So, it can lower your anxiety, that fear when you're going into it.
I always have my injured gymnast doing it too. So I
Yeah,
tell them,
me
like,
too.
hey, you can't get an overuse injury in your brain. And you might see some smoke come out or something. If that happens, just cool it off a little
There's
bit and
always
then
smoke.
get back into it again. But yeah, and you can get all these reps in. There's some cool like little stories that I've heard from visualization type stuff where who was it? It was Morgan Hom. He was out at Flip Fest one year when I was coaching out there as a college gymnast. And he was talking about he did a skill on P bars and landed on top of his shoulder on the P bar, and it did nerve damage basically. And so
Mm,
he couldn't hardly raise his arm. It went on for so long that his shoulder muscle, his deltoid, actually started kind of atrophying and getting smaller, and he still just couldn't activate it. He couldn't get it to move, and he would just lay in bed every night and just visualize like signals going to his muscle over and over and over again. He would just sit there and do it for I don't know how long, and then one night he was laying there doing it, and he felt a twitch in his shoulder. He was like, "Oh, that was cool." And he did it again and it twitched again. It twitched again. It twitched again. Right. And then eventually, 4 more months down the road or something, because nerves take forever to heal. Then he got back to it again and he could do stuff and he could build it back up and build it stronger. But he credited that to some of his healing and recovery.
yeah. I mean, I get it because even when you practice visualization, like I love the beach one because if you get it so detailed, it's like you can actually feel the sun on your skin when you're laying
Hmm.
there, or you can
Yeah.
actually feel the wind blowing. So your brain is so powerful. And if you put in the effort into this visualization, then once you get good with visualizing skills and routines, then you can visualize, how do I correct mistakes? If this happens, you can predict things happening and then see how would you fix them. And I think that's kind of a great thing for our athletes, for building autonomy and problem solving for them, being able to do these skills, because instead of always asking like, how do I do this? Then I feel like they jump to feeling like they have more control over how their skills progress and more control over just their level of emotional stability when they're going into it too. I just feel like they can think more logically when they're
Yeah.
training.
Yeah. I think it's just, you use it as a tool when they first start visualizing. I think it's like you said, start with the picture. But they, whenever I asked them, I said, well, how are you visualizing? Are you basically, I say, like a third person? Are you like outside your body filming yourself doing it? Because that's a beginning stage. I said, but you have to get to the point where you actually see the bars in front of you. You actually see your hands on the bars. You actually,
Hmm.
Hmm.
see the see the air. And basically, when you're flipping, you see the ceiling, you see the floor, you see all those things as in the first person when you're doing it yourself. And I think a lot of athletes, when they visualize, they do it as a third person. They do it as like, I'm going to watch myself do this routine rather than actually being in the routine. Both are helpful, but obviously being in the routine, seeing the bars, feeling the bars or the beam or whatever, but actually seeing and feeling the apparatus as you're doing the skills is important. And I like, Rebecca, what you said as far as just breaking it down to, let's just do one skill that way. Let's see if you can visualize yourself in the first person doing this one skill. And if they can master that, they say, okay, let's go on to the next skill. Let's do these two skills in a row. And eventually you'll build up to that routine. But I think it's a key point is to ask your athletes how they're seeing themselves, how they're, visualizing it. What do they see when they do that? I think
Hmm.
that's important.
Yeah, and it's about like harnessing your imagination because your
Yes.
imagination can be a force for good or a force for evil for
Ooh.
yourself, right?
Yeah.
And this is something I stole from Becca, but I had a gymnast the other day that she's having trouble with her Yurchenko vault, and I said, well, let's do a few in your brain, and then let's try it again. And she's like, I keep picturing myself messing up. I was like, okay, that's fine. So then we sat down and she wrote out in painful detail exactly how to do the skill. Like we went like kick left leg, kick right leg, or push right leg. And we were really getting into detail because her imagination was just running wild with the
Yeah.
skill. And then I told her that she has to read it out loud to herself while she's visualizing it. And that finally got her to doing it correctly. But even writing it out and then trying to do it in her head still didn't work. She had to actually read it out loud so that way
Yes.
her own ears were hearing her own voice tell her what to do. And that is what made the difference. And I'm
Yeah.
not smart enough to come up with that on my own. I definitely came up with that from Becca, or stole that from Becca.
Yeah. Hey, another
You
tool
are too.
another tool I thought of was uh, I will actually have the athlete go to the apparatus that they're
Yeah.
visualizing. I'll have them go
Mm-hmm.
over to the rings or go over to the pommel horse or, whatever it happens to be, actually go to that equipment, look at the equipment, and then close their eyes and go through that process. So,
Yep. Used to actually put our hands like on the pommel horse as I was doing visualization. Used to, yeah, I'd grab the P bars, and then put my arms down and then go. I'd stand under the rings. It was a lot of effort to jump up there because I'm so short. So I'd just stand under the rings and do that. But yeah, we would sometimes, we'd normally pick like on floor, we'd pick like a small space of the floor where we could kind of go through some kind of twitchy movements of what we would be doing. But we're not actually throwing our arms up for the set or pulling for the twist, but just kind of small muscle activation for what muscles we actually use for that movement. And then, I'd still turn around when it was time to turn around, but I would stay in like a little 5x5 area on the floor and we'd all kind of pick a spot. Sometimes guys would actually run across the floor, then stop and visualize the corner and do that sort of thing. But for me, as long as I kind of had a corner on the floor that I could do it in and just kind of go through those little, like, this is where my
Mm-hmm.
hips would be, kind of pulling my head up, that sort of thing. There was a really cool video that I sent you, Becca, about what was it? The Blue Angels, right? Blue Angels?
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
really
yeah.
cool. Yeah,
And they were going through their visualization thing where their team leader, whatever the guy's title is, but basically the leader
the
of the
head
group,
guy.
the head guy, yeah, yeah, that's on his business card, head guy. Uh,
I hope
and
so.
basically he was going through all the directions, the altitudes, the speeds, all the different things. And while he was reading it out loud, everyone was sitting there, hands in a position that they would be in, hand on the throttle, or feet on pedals, or hand on the stick, whatever it was. They would have their hands in the proper place, and they'd be moving it, and they would even like turn their head to like look at what they would be looking at that time with their eyes closed. They would be looking up or looking down for the other plane. And man, it was really intense. It was really cool how they were doing it.
Yeah, it was really cool. And if you
So,
watch some of the male like gymnasts, like see them do it a lot. I think that's one of the coolest things about visualization. Call that marking visualization is
Okay.
like
Yeah,
where
yeah.
they can feel it through them. Like, so they're like marking the routine. Cause then once you get that combined with keywords, it can be really cool. So before, I always feel like full turns is a big one on Beam. It's like,
Yeah.
you're like, you can kind of see your step in the releve, but then you also feel that lift because you have to have the lift going into it. So it's like that can be part of your keyword of going into that skill. So
Hmm.
it's really cool once you start combining everything and putting in the ways you learn into
and
it.
yeah, and in that same notation of combining things, I will have the athletes actually, the first thing they visualize is saluting the judge, watching the
Hmm.
judge raise their hand before they start the routine. I think some of those little key things are helpful for them to get an understanding of, because normally you want them to visualize under a competition type setting of doing their routine, and I think that's important to start with that. They can see the judge. They can see the judge raise their other flag or their hand for them to start the routine, and then they go through the visualization. It's the whole process that they
Yeah.
go through. The other part is, in golf you have that little waggle, they call it. In gymnastics, sometimes they'll have that same little thing that they do, and they do it the same way before they start their routine, and it's different for everyone, but everyone kind of has it. I don't know if you've ever watched athletes, but they'll always do things the exact same way that before the start of the routine, whether it's the way they chalk up, whether it's the way they blow the chalk out of their hands, how many times they rub their hands together, whatever that is, that all becomes part of that visualization process. So it always has to be the same as they're going to actually do it. And I think keeping that in mind is really helpful for the athletes to remind them.
Hmm.
Yeah, and building up to that, like starting out with those basics and then getting to those parts. If you are a coach, parent, or athlete, I think the simple takeaway is that remembering mental skills, deep breathing, and visualization, while we talk about them a lot, they are skills that have to be learned and trained and practiced. If you can start integrating them into your programs, I think that's probably the best way, but also something they can practice at home. So if there's a simple way for coaches to start incorporating this into your programs. It's just to make deep breathing a short, consistent routine. And it's not just something that happens when people are struggling. If we can make it a part of the program versus this happens when you are messing up on a skill, you're dealing with anxiety or a mental block, we can eliminate that spotlight. So our teens aren't feeling so embarrassed when it's coming to learning to do these skills and starting a minute or two, like we said earlier. So if you but have ways that you've been incorporating this into your gyms, let us know. I'd really like to hear how you've been trying to train deep breathing or visualization into your gyms. I love hearing how people do this stuff. And if you enjoy this episode, please share it with anyone who could benefit from the conversation. And until next time, stay happy, healthy, and high performing.